This is part 28 of LINQ tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss generation operators in LINQ. All of these standard query operators belong to generation operators category. Let's look at them one by one with examples. Range operator generates a sequence of integers within a specified range. Let's understand what we mean by this with an example. Let's say we want to print all the even numbers between 1 and 10, and we want to achieve this without using LINQ. If that's the case, we would use a for loop like this. For int I is equal to 1, I less than or equal to 10, I plus plus, and then inside the for loop we'll check when the number is divided by 2 and when the remainder is 0, then we know that number is even, in which case we want to print the value of I onto the console. So when we run this, we get all the numbers between 1 and 10. Now let's see how to achieve the same thing using LINQ range method. This range method is present in enumerable class, and notice this method has got two parameters. The first parameter is called the start parameter, and this parameter specifies the first integer within the resultant sequence. So within the resultant sequence we want numbers from 1 till 10, and then from that numbers we want to retrieve only the even numbers. So first of all, we want to generate numbers from 1 till 10. So the first parameter is going to specify the integer at which we want to start the numbers in the resultant sequence. So in this case from 1, and the second parameter specifies the number of sequential integers starting from that number. So we want 10 numbers starting from 1 in a sequential order. So this call here is going to return us an I enumerable of int which is going to contain numbers 1 till 10. So let's create a variable of type I enumerable of int, and let's call that result. And now let's use a for each loop and then print each value that is present within the resultant sequence. So when we run this, as you might expect, it's going to print all the numbers from 1 till 10, but that's not what we want. We want only the even numbers. If that's the case, we are going to chain this where method here and then specify a lambda expression which is going to retrieve only even numbers. Alright, now let's look at repeat operator. This repeat operator is used to generate a sequence that contains one repeated value. Let's look at an example. So if you look at this example right here, so again this repeat method is present in the enumerable class, and again notice this method has got two parameters as well. So the first parameter is the value that we want to be repeated within the resultant sequence. So we want this hello word to be repeated 5 times within the resultant sequence. So we are passing the first parameter as hello, and since we want that to be repeated 5 times, we are passing 5 as the second parameter. So what this is going to do is return an I enumerable of string, and that resultant sequence is going to contain this word hello 5 times. When we use a for each loop through each element within that resultant sequence, and when we write the value of that element to console, we are going to get this hello word printed 5 times. So that's repeat. Empty operator returns an empty sequence of the specified type. So what does this mean? Now look at this. Again, this empty is present in the enumerable class. Now notice here the type is integer. Okay, so what is this line of code going to do? It's going to return an empty I enumerable of int, and here the type is specified as string, so this piece of code is going to return an empty I enumerable of string. So the immediate next question that comes to our mind is, where is this useful? Let's actually understand that with an example. So let's say we've got a method, and let's make it static, and let's say this method returns I enumerable of int, and let's call it get data. So since it returns I enumerable of int, let's return a new list of integer, and let's say this method is going to return 1 till 3, and here we are going to call this get data method. Now when we run this as it is, it's going to print those numbers from 1 till 3. Now let's say this method, we don't own this method. let's say this application makes a call to a method that is present in a third-party application, a third-party API, and we don't have any control on third-party application. All this application does is make a call to that method. Whatever that method returns, it's storing that in this result variable and then using a for each loop to loop through each item and printing its value onto the console. Okay, now let's say things have changed and then for some reason this method is actually returning null. Now what do you think is going to happen when we run this piece of code? It's going to throw a null reference exception. That's because this method returns null and then we are trying to loop through a null reference object, so obviously it throws that null reference exception. Okay, now there are several ways we can correct this problem. One way is if result not equal to null. If the result is not equal to null, only then try to loop through each item in the result. Okay, so it's not going to throw the exception. Okay, so that's one way. The other way is by using the empty method. So we can use null coalescing operator here. So this get data may return null. Okay, if that is the case, then what we want to do is use enumerable dot empty method. So enumerable empty of int. So what is this going to do? Look at the return type. It returns an I enumerable of int. So it's going to return an I enumerable of int empty sequence. So now when we run this, look at this, we don't get the exception. So this will be an empty sequence with no elements in it. If we actually print the count of that, console.writeLine result.count, we get 0. So that's one of the uses of this empty method. And here is the same example that we just discussed. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.